Sarah's indifference is on full display as she ignores Mr. Thompson's simple request for water. The elderly patient, weak and thirsty, calls out to her as she passes by his room. Sarah barely acknowledges him, muttering a half-hearted, "I'll be right there," without breaking her stride. She continues down the hallway, focused on her clipboard and the tasks she deems more important. Mr. Thompson sighs, his parched throat making it difficult to swallow. He watches Sarah disappear around a corner, feeling invisible and unimportant. This isn't the first time she's dismissed his needs, and he wonders if it's personal or if she treats all patients this way. The scene shifts as Nurse Linda, the head nurse, enters the ward. Her presence commands attention, and Sarah straightens up, plastering on a fake smile. Linda approaches Sarah, her face a mix of approval and concern. "Sarah, your efficiency is commendable," Linda begins, her tone measured. "But I've noticed some patients feeling neglected. Remember, empathy is crucial in our line of work." Sarah nods, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Of course, Linda. I'll keep that in mind," she responds, her voice devoid of any real commitment. As soon as Linda turns away, Sarah's face falls back into its usual mask of indifference. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson observes the interaction from his bed. Frustrated and resigned, he reaches for the mysterious necklace around his neck. His fingers trace the intricate patterns on the pendant, and his mind drifts to memories of his past. In his younger days, Mr. Thompson was a respected spiritual leader, guiding others with wisdom and compassion. The necklace, a symbol of his role, of the knowledge he carries, seems to pulse with energy as he reminisces. He wonders how he ended up here, in a hospital where even basic kindness seems in short supply. As Sarah resumes her rounds, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Mr. Thompson, the contrast between her cold efficiency and the warmth of his memories is stark. The ward continues its busy routine, but beneath the surface, tensions simmer and secrets wait to be revealed. Linda pulls Sarah aside into a quiet corner of the ward, her expression serious. "Sarah, we have a crucial update," she says in a hushed tone. "The Hospital Inspection Council is scheduled to visit next week. We need to be in top form." Sarah feels a knot forming in her stomach. She knows her performance will be under scrutiny, and the pressure to maintain the hospital's reputation weighs heavily on her. "I understand," she responds, her voice tight. "I'll make sure everything is in order." As Linda walks away, Sarah's mind races. She's confident in her technical skills, but patient care has never been her strong suit. She glances at Mr. Thompson's room, hearing his call button beeping insistently. Despite the warning about empathy, Sarah decides to ignore his complaints of pain. She rationalizes that addressing every minor issue won't reflect well during the inspection. Mr. Thompson winces as he shifts in his bed, the pain in his joints flaring up. He watches Sarah pass by his room without a glance, feeling increasingly frustrated and alone. In an attempt to distract himself from the discomfort, he strikes up a conversation with Amy, a younger, more attentive nurse. "You know," Mr. Thompson begins, his voice soft but filled with hidden meaning, "this necklace isn't just for show." Amy leans in, intrigued. It holds secrets of healing and life stories that could help so many people. Amy's eyes widen with curiosity. "Really? That sounds fascinating, Mr. Thompson. Could you tell me more about it?" As Mr. Thompson shares snippets of wisdom gleaned from his years as a spiritual leader, Sarah continues her rounds, oblivious to the wealth of knowledge and potential for healing she's ignoring. The contrast between Amy's genuine interest and Sarah's indifference becomes increasingly apparent, setting the stage for the challenges to come during the inspection week. The week of the inspection arrives, bringing with it a palpable tension throughout the hospital. Sarah attempts to prepare, reviewing patient charts and memorizing protocols, but her approach remains superficial. She continues to neglect Mr. Thompson, viewing his needs as a distraction from her more pressing concerns. As the inspection team makes its way through the ward, Sarah grows increasingly nervous. She puts on a facade of confidence, presenting a polished but hollow overview of the hospital's care procedures. Dr. Stevens, the head of the inspection council, listens with a furrowed brow, his discomfort evident. "And how do you ensure personalized care for each patient?" Dr. Stevens inquires, his gaze sharp. Sarah falters momentarily before launching into a rehearsed response about individualized care plans. Her words sound empty, even to her own ears. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson's condition worsens. The pain that Sarah dismissed earlier has intensified, and he repeatedly presses his call button, seeking help. The constant beeping from his room catches Dr. Stevens' attention. Panicking, Sarah makes a rash decision. Under the guise of checking on Mr. Thompson, she slips into his room and disconnects the call button. "This is for your own good," she mutters, avoiding eye contact with the distressed patient. "You're disrupting the inspection." Mr. Thompson's pleas fall on deaf ears as Sarah hurries out, leaving him helpless and in pain. The irony of her actions, prioritizing the appearance of good care over actually providing it, is lost on her in a moment. As Sarah rejoins the inspection group, she fails to notice Dr. Stevens' growing skepticism. Her attempts to present a flawless image are beginning to crumble, setting the stage for a confrontation that will expose the true state of patient care in the ward. Sarah's hasty attempt to cover up her negligence backfires spectacularly. As she rushes to disconnect Mr. Thompson's call button, her foot catches on a loose tile. She stumbles, arms flailing, and crashes to the floor of Mr. Thompson's room with a loud thud. The noise immediately draws the attention of the inspection team, who rush to investigate. Dr. Stevens is the first to enter, his eyes widening as he takes in the scene. Sarah scrambles to her feet, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. In her fall, she knocked over a small table, scattering Mr. Thompson's personal belongings and medical chart across the floor. As Sarah bends to gather the fallen items, Dr. Stevens picks up Mr. Thompson's chart. His expression darkens as he flips through the pages, filled with hastily scribbled notes detailing missed medications, ignored complaints, and a clear pattern of neglect. "What's the meaning of this?" Dr. Stevens demands, his voice sharp with barely contained anger. Sarah opens her mouth to respond, but no words come out. The room fills with a tense silence, broken only by Mr. Thompson's labored breathing. Suddenly, Dr. Stevens' gaze shifts to the bed, and his face pales. "Mr. Thompson," he whispers, recognition dawning in his eyes. The atmosphere in the room changes instantly. Dr. Stevens approaches the bed, his professional demeanor cracking to reveal a mix of shock and guilt. Sarah watches, confused by the sudden shift in dynamics. Mr. Thompson looks up at Dr. Stevens, a flicker of recognition passing over his tired features. "It's been a long time, hasn't it, young Stephen?" he says weakly. The rest of the inspection team exchanges puzzled glances, sensing that there's more to the situation than a simple case of neglect. Sarah stands frozen, realizing that her actions have set in motion events far beyond her control. As the tension in the room builds, it becomes clear that the connection between Dr. Stevens and Mr. Thompson will be the key to unraveling the deeper issues plaguing the hospital. Dr. Stevens stands rooted to the spot, memories flooding back as he gazes at Mr. Thompson. His mind races through images of his youth guidance sessions, spiritual retreats, and life-changing conversations with a man who now lies neglected in a hospital bed. I had no idea you were here," Dr. Stevens stammers, his usual composure shattered. "If I had known." Mr. Thompson manages a weak smile. "Life has a way of bringing us full circle, doesn't it?" The rest of the inspection team watches in stunned silence as Dr. Stevens grapples with his emotions. His guilt is palpable, not just for failing to recognize Mr. Thompson, but for being part of a system that allowed such neglect to occur. Meanwhile, Linda bursts into the room, having heard the commotion. She takes in the scene Sarah's disheveled appearance, the scattered medical records, and Dr. Stevens' obvious distress. "Sarah, you're suspended effective immediately," Linda announces, her voice cold with disappointment and fury. "Please leave the premises now." Sarah, still in shock, stumbles out of the room without a word. As she leaves, she hears the inspection team beginning to discuss the implications of what they've witnessed. Words like systemic failure and complete overhaul float through the air. Dr. Stevens excuses himself, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. He retreats to a quiet corner of the hospital, his mind reeling from the unexpected reunion and the stark realization of his own shortcomings as a leader in the medical community. Back in the room, Linda attempts to smooth things over with the remaining inspectors, but it's clear that the damage has been done. The revelation of Mr. Thompson's identity and the blatant evidence of neglect have exposed deep-rooted issues that can no longer be ignored. As the day draws to a close, the hospital buzzes with tension and uncertainty. The inspection, meant to be a routine evaluation, has turned into a catalyst for change that will affect everyone involved. Sarah exits the hospital, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, and a creeping sense of shame. The gravity of her actions and their consequences is beginning to sink in. She fumbles for her car keys, desperate to escape the scene of her humiliation. But as she reaches her car, she's met with another setback. The engine sputters and dies, refusing to start. Sarah slams her hands against the steering wheel in frustration. She's trapped, both literally and metaphorically, forced to confront the reality of her situation. Stranded in the parking lot, Sarah observes the comings and goings of hospital staff and visitors. She watches as a nurse gently assists an elderly patient into a wheelchair, their interaction marked by patience and kindness. In another corner, a doctor kneels to comfort a crying child, offering a reassuring smile. These small acts of compassion, which Sarah had always dismissed as unnecessary, now stand in stark contrast to her own behavior. She realizes how far she's strayed from the ideals that once led her to pursue nursing. As twilight descends, Sarah's mind drifts to memories of her childhood. She recalls her grandmother, a retired nurse, telling stories of the lives she touched and the difference she made. Young Sarah had listened with wide-eyed admiration, vowing to follow in her grandmother's footsteps. What happened to that girl? Sarah whispers to herself, a lump forming in her throat. She remembers the excitement of her first day in nursing school, the pride she felt when she received her degree, and the gradual erosion of her empathy as she faced the daily grind of hospital work. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of why she became a nurse in the first place. The parking lot empties as night falls, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She realizes that this moment of crisis is also an opportunity, a chance to reconnect with her original purpose and redefine her approach to patient care. As Sarah sits in her car, grappling with her thoughts, she notices a familiar figure approaching. It's Mike, a fellow nurse from the pediatric ward, known for his cheerful demeanor and rapport with patients. "Car trouble?" Mike asks, his voice tinged with concern. Sarah nods, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, but I'll figure it out," she replies curtly, embarrassment coloring her words. Mike hesitates, clearly wanting to help. "I could give you a lift home if you need it," he offers. For a moment, Sarah considers accepting. But the thought of explaining her situation, of admitting her failures, is too much to bear. "No thanks. I'm fine," she says, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mike looks at her uncertainly, but respects her decision. "All right, if you're sure. Take care, Sarah," he says before walking away. As Mike's footsteps fade, Sarah feels a pang of regret. She's pushed away a genuine offer of help, just as she's been doing with her patients. The irony isn't lost on her. Deciding she needs some air, Sarah gets out of her car and begins to walk. The cool night breeze helps clear her head as she reflects on the day's events. She thinks about Mr. Thompson, Dr. Stevens' reaction, and the years of negligence that led to this point. Sarah finds herself at a small park near the hospital. She sits on a bench, her mind racing through the choices that brought her here. She remembers the idealistic young woman who entered nursing school, full of compassion and desire to help others. When did that person disappear? As the reality of her suspension and possible career ending sinks in, Sarah realizes she's at a crossroads. She can either continue down this path of indifference, or she can use this as a wake-up call to rediscover her purpose. Sitting alone in the darkened park, Sarah makes a decision. She can't continue like this. Something needs to change, and that change needs to start with her. It won't be easy, but she's determined to find a way to become the nurse she once aspired to be. The next morning, Sarah returns to the hospital, her resolve strengthened by a night of intense self-reflection. She's not here to beg for her job back, but to face the consequences of her actions and hopefully find a path to redemption. As she walks through the familiar corridors, she notices the wary glances and hushed whispers of her colleagues. News of her suspension has clearly spread. Sarah swallows her pride and continues on, her destination clear in her mind. She arrives at Mr. Thompson's room, hesitating for a moment before knocking softly. "Come in," a weak voice calls out. Sarah enters, her eyes immediately drawn to Mr. Thompson. In the harsh morning light, she truly sees him for the first time, not as a nuisance or a task to be completed, but as a human being in need of care and compassion. "Mr. Thompson," she begins, her voice wavering slightly, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused you." Mr. Thompson regards her silently for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "Apology accepted," he says finally, his voice gentle. "But what matters now is what you'll do going forward." Encouraged by his response, Sarah moves closer to his bedside. "I want to make things right," she says earnestly. "I know I've lost my job, but before I leave, I want to ensure you're receiving the care you need. Can you tell me about your pain? What can I do to help?" As Mr. Thompson begins to describe his symptoms, Sarah listens attentively, taking mental notes. She checks his chart, asks follow-up questions, and for the first time in years, truly engages with a patient. Observing her changed demeanor, Mr. Thompson's eyes twinkle with a hint of wisdom. "You know," he says, fingering his mysterious necklace, "it's never too late to learn about true healing and compassion. Would you like to hear about it?" Sarah, surprised by the offer, nods eagerly. As Mr. Thompson begins to share his knowledge, she realizes that this might be the first step on her journey of redemption and rediscovery of her calling as a nurse. As Sarah spends time with Mr. Thompson, she becomes increasingly intrigued by the wisdom he shares. The mysterious necklace, she learns, is more than just an ornament. It's a symbol of his life's journey and the knowledge he's accumulated. Each bead represents a lesson learned, a life touched. Mr. Thompson explains, his voice growing stronger as he speaks. Sarah listens intently, her previous indifference replaced by genuine curiosity. Mr. Thompson begins to recount tales from his past, stories of healing, both physical and spiritual, that he facilitated as a respected community leader. Sarah is captivated by his experiences, recognizing the profound impact of empathy and compassion in the healing process. As they talk, Sarah's mind flashes back to her early days of nursing. She remembers the satisfaction of connecting with patients, the joy of seeing them recover. Somehow along the way, she had lost sight of these fundamental aspects of her profession. Inspired by Mr. Thompson's teachings, Sarah begins to apply his principles in her interactions with other patients and staff. Although no longer officially employed, she volunteers her time, assisting where she can under the wary but gradually softening supervision of the hospital administration. Other nurses notice the change in Sarah's demeanor. Her gentleness with patients, her attentiveness to their needs, and her willingness to go the extra mile start to influence those around her. Slowly, a ripple effect begins, with more staff members adopting a more compassionate approach to patient care. Linda, observing this transformation, is both impressed and conflicted. She sees the positive impact Sarah is having but struggles with the knowledge of her past behavior and the official reprimands on record. As days pass, Mr. Thompson's health begins to improve, seemingly in tandem with Sarah's spiritual growth. The ward's atmosphere shifts, becoming warmer and more welcoming. Patients report higher satisfaction, and even the most cynical staff members find themselves reevaluating their approach to care. Sarah, for her part, feels a renewed sense of purpose. She realizes that true nursing goes beyond technical skills. It's about connecting with patients on a human level, understanding their fears, and providing comfort along with medical care. As the positive changes in the ward become more evident, Linda finds herself at a crossroads. She observes Sarah's transformation and the ripple effect it's having on patient care and staff morale. The improvement is undeniable, forcing Linda to question her own leadership style and the hospital's priorities. One afternoon, Linda approaches Sarah. "I've been watching you," she admits, her tone a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "The change in you, and in this ward, is remarkable." Sarah, surprised by the acknowledgement, nods appreciatively. However, before they can discuss further, they're interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Stevens, who has returned to conduct a follow-up investigation. Dr. Stevens, having spent time reflecting on his own past and the recent events, scrutinizes the ward with a keen eye. He notices the improved atmosphere and the more attentive care provided by the staff. However, as he delves deeper into the hospital records, he uncovers a disturbing pattern. "Linda, can you explain these discrepancies?" Dr. Stevens asks, presenting a file of documents. The papers reveal a history of covered-up mistakes, altered records, and a systematic approach to prioritizing the hospital's reputation over patient welfare. Linda pales, realizing the extent of her complicity in the hospital's flawed practices. She glances at Sarah, who stands nearby, shocked by the revelation. I was just trying to protect the hospital," Linda stammers, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Dr. Stevens shakes his head, his disappointment palpable. "By covering up errors, you've put patients at risk and fostered a culture of negligence." As the gravity of the situation sinks in, Sarah steps forward. "Dr. Stevens," she begins, her voice steady, "I know I've made mistakes, serious ones. But I've learned so much from Mr. Thompson about true healing and compassion. If given the chance, I believe I can help implement real, positive changes here." Dr. Stevens considers her words, looking between Sarah, Linda, and the evidence before him. After a long moment, he nods. "Sarah, your transformation is commendable. I'm willing to give you that chance, under close supervision." Turning to Linda, his expression hardens. As for you, there will be consequences for these cover-ups. An official investigation will be launched. As Linda is led away to face the repercussions of her actions, Sarah feels a mix of emotions: relief at her second chance, determination to make real changes, and a twinge of sadness for Linda's downfall. The scene ends with Sarah returning to Mr. Thompson's room, ready to continue her journey of growth and redemption. The future of the hospital remains uncertain, but there's a sense of hope, a chance for genuine reform, and a return to the true values of healthcare. This conclusion leaves the story open-ended, suggesting Sarah's ongoing transformation and the potential for further developments in the hospital's approach to patient care.